Welcome to the private life of Peg Lynch. I'm James Lilacs, one of Peg Lynch's biggest and shortest fans, perhaps. And I'm here with...
And I am Astrid King, and I am Peg Lynch's daughter, still, after all these episodes.
And in a few moments, you will hear Astrid transform and channel her mother and tell a story. And by the way, if you're just starting this story in the middle, we advise you go back to the beginning and catch Peg's rise from a small town in Minnesota to the heights of television in one long arc. Well, here we are, and what's going to happen in her career and life this episode?
Well, we don't want to give it all away, but my mother somehow managed to juggle being a career woman and having a successful career and be a mother and be a wife.
And writing and starring in her own network television show.
Every week.
This is not community theater that she dropped down to every 2 or 3 weeks or so. She was on live television while being a wife and a mother and all these other things.
She was tired a lot, make no mistake, but she did manage. She managed to do it. And she also managed to succeed as a woman in a man's world, in a business world. I mean, this is a woman we're talking about who is still multiplying 2 times 0 and getting 2. And so it was difficult. But she managed. There were some unpleasant things that happened to her, but she managed.
Difficult perhaps now. Imagine
Absolutely.
Imagine in the 50s. By the way, those of you who are fans of old Hollywood, you'll enjoy the guest appearance in this episode by Basil Rathbone, who appeared on her show.
A great fan of my mother's, too, who in fact said to her long after it was over, dear Peggy, if this had been in another life, I'm sure we would have been married.
Well, you may feel the same way after this episode as well. So now we'll allow Peg to emerge from Astrid, and we'll hear the story of her life in network television and at home. One journal, noting her new domestic status, said, quote, because Peg Lynch of Ethel and Albert is now a mother and homemaker as well as a writer and actress, friends from her University of Minnesota days refer to her as Triple Threat Peg.
That was in some magazine. Don't you love it? I think someone was just being funny. I can't imagine being a threat to any of the girls from school. Why, I'd always had them on pedestals, you know, all married and happy with kids years before I caught up. I did have a career, true. But Odd and I made the decision early on that I would continue with Ethel and Albert after our marriage. Well, it's foolish to think success will go on forever. You can be wined and dined and toasted today and forgotten by next week. It would have been idiotic to ignore what had come my way. I just had to find a way of combining motherhood and a television career, that's all. And,
Well, I had my mother and my aunt. That's how I juggled it, because if I hadn't had them, I wouldn't have left my daughter with a babysitter. She'd have gone in a trundle basket, I guess, or I'd have given it up. I wouldn't have done it.
Mother kept house, cooking, shopping, and she was a nurse, too. My Aunt Helen kept the accounts. She was a bookkeeper, typed, knew shorthand. She'd come to New York from St. Paul to be my secretary. And Odd was now based up in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, with the pulp and paper industry, and he only came home weekends. So we weren't together as much as we'd have liked, but listen, when it comes right down to it, we had all the advantages of married life and none of the disadvantages. Whenever we were together, it was like a honeymoon. We've never had one quarrel in almost 60 years. Any slight misunderstandings have always been cleared up at once. I'm a person who can't hold a grudge or smolder like a volcano. If something bothers me, I speak up and I get it settled. Well, it's worked. Look, I could never have managed a career without the complete support of the family, is about the size of it. They all knew that getting a script done came first. Well, after the baby, Lisa, as I nicknamed her, I'd wanted to call her Astrid after my Norwegian mother-in-law, but I didn't want kids at school nicknaming her, shortening it, you know. So we made it her middle name. And I picked Elise after my aunt, the doctor who delivered her. I guess because she was standing there. Elise Astrid Ronning, in any event, was the new addition to the family. 7 pounds, 10 ounces. But you can't keep a baby and a husband and a mother and an aunt and 10 filing cabinets full of scripts in a 1-bedroom apartment and write and perform 2 live comedy shows every week on television. Well, at least I couldn't. Triple threat or not. Odd and I bought a house, Witchstone, it was called. It's up in Stamford, Connecticut on Apple Tree Lane, 40 minutes by train from Grand Central. It's built in 1723 with a big 10-foot square central chimney with 3 fireplaces around it. It was just darling. Far too small for all of us, but I fell in love with it. I'm really not very practical when it comes right down to it. And I kept my Gramercy Park apartment, $100 a month rent, because I needed it for work, and I was in there most of the week. Of course, I worried about burglars with no one there full time, and I kept a $20 bill on the television set just as you walked in, along with a note saying, "Mother, this is all the cash in the house. Careful, the snake is loose again." Well, everyone made fun of me, but I tell you, we were the only apartment in the building that was never robbed.
Here's the verdict of Jack Gould, who was the New York Times TV writer. Quote, Ethel and Albert, wonderfully played by Peg Lynch and Alan Bunce, are the proverbial smash. And unlike the general run of domestic comedies, Miss Lynch, who writes the scripts, keeps the couple's experiences within the bounds of plausibility and thankfully eschews broad slapstick.
Well, after 2 years of doing the Kate Smith shows twice a week, the network made us an offer.
And here's how NBC broke the news to the world. Quote, radio's favorite married couple, Ethel and Albert, is having a TV house party, and you're invited. Starting April 25th and every Saturday night thereafter, Ethel and Albert will return to the NBC television network in their new comedy series from 7:30 to 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Tickets may be obtained by writing NBC Guest Relations Department, 30 Rockefeller Plaza, New York, New York.
Our own half hour. I signed with Ted Ashley, agent. He was then the Ashley Steiner agency. Ted had a way of talking. He couldn't understand a word that was coming out of that man's mouth, and he went on to become the chairman of Warner Brothers. Anyway, I also hooked up with Jaffe and Jaffe, who were big showbiz lawyers, because I wasn't just writing and acting. I owned my show. You know, I paid the salaries of everyone who worked on Ethel and Albert. I paid for the set, the clothes, props, and so on. I had to deal with contracts, casting, network negotiations, budgets, taxes. I needed advice, help, you know, some weight behind me so I wouldn't be taken for a ride. Well, we'll get to that. Anyhow, the first thing that Ethel and Albert needed, as usual, was a sponsor.
It started out with Johnson's Wax, and I was wooed. Oh my God, Henry Jaffe called me and said, get into town at once. We want you to have dinner with your new sponsor, Johnson's Wax. And I came in, I was Friday morning, and my God, we had lunch with these men and dinner, and we talked about the show. I thought we'd never shut up. And boy, if NBC didn't pick it up, they were going to take us to CBS and whatever. Don't worry about a thing that was going on, such. And I went home, all set to go. Monday morning, Henry called me sharp and said the deal was off. I said, it's off? I mean, you would have thought these people were going to kill themselves if I didn't do the show for them. So, okay. Oh, I'll bet it's 15 years later. And I heard the reason from Nelson Case, the announcer. He said, don't you know what happened? And I said, no, what? He said, Mrs. Johnson came back from sunning herself on the Riviera, and she took one look at Peg's face, and she said to her husband, she reminds me of your first wife, and I'm not going to look at that face every week. Isn't that crazy? Well, I could see it. I didn't blame her. I really didn't.
Now, this was April 1953, early television, and companies were just wild to get their products shown on TV, and they all competed for airtime. And so only a few days later, Henry Jaffe called again.
He said, come on in, got a new sponsor, pens. It was a chlorophyll tablet. We had lunch and we had dinner, and we went through the whole ball of wax, and Monday morning, Henry Jaffe calls the deal's off. What had happened, I found out why. Time magazine came out over the weekend, and it said that there was nothing to this chlorophyll business at all. They had just discovered that it did not wipe away all the odors or whatever chlorophyll did. And so they went bankrupt over the weekend. So on this coming Friday, I get another call, jaded by this time.
But Henry said, come in. So I went in, and I talked to more people. Pat Weaver was there, too. He was then head of NBC. It was Sigourney Weaver, as she calls herself now. Her dad, nice man. And he dangled some other carrot to these people, more airtime for specials, I think. But anyhow, success. Finally.
Sunbeam, the best electric appliances made, presents Ethel and Albert. Starring Peg Lynch and Alan Buck. Directed by Walter Hart. Written by Peg Lynch. And brought to you by the product's highest in quality. The famed mix master, the great coffee master. It's Sunbeam every time, that's for me. Iron, steam, or dry with a Sunbeam, and let it smooth all your cares away. Men shave faster with a new shave master. The swing is to Sunbeam today.
Mother just used to love telling the story of how she was walking past the hardware store in downtown Stamford one day, Lisa toddling along beside, holding her hand, when a window display featuring Ethel and Albert and, I don't know, a deep-fat fryer or something caught Lisa's eye. "Sunbeam," she cried, "the best electrical appliances made." And a woman standing next to them nearly fell over. "Why, that's incredible," she said. "She's reading already? How old is she?" "Almost 2, Mother said, rather proudly. Well, we had Sunbeam everything around the house, of course. It wasn't surprising. I've still got the waffle iron they gave us, 60 years ago? Works, too.
NBC, in fact, took out a full-page ad in Variety. No small thing. It promoted their all-star Saturday night lineup. Ethel and Albert was top of the list. After that, you had some guys, Mickey Rooney, Imogene Coca, Jimmy Durante, Donald O'Connor, whatever happened to them. Oh, and also introducing George Gobel.
And I am not exaggerating here. I don't think we got one bad review. I used a clipping service, so I got sent every mention or notice in every paper or magazine, anything and everything said about Ethel and Albert anywhere. Mother filed them all in scrapbooks. I never read them. I didn't have time. I was working 18-hour days, writing one week's show, rehearsing the second week's, planning the script, cast, and the sets for the following one. But if an especially nice mention came in, something from a well-known critic, I always wrote back and thanked them. Well, I was very grateful. And for the fan mail, I think we had over 10,000 on the mailing list, at least. I answered them all, always, with my Aunt Helen's help, of course, but I'd often tack on a personal note. One day I got this letter thanking me for writing to his mother all these years, saying how much it had meant to her, and telling me she had just died. And he signed the letter, "Cordially yours, Herman Hupfeld. P.S., it said, I wrote as time goes by." Well, I immediately phoned him. He lived out in New Jersey, and he came in, and we met for a cup of coffee and talked. Then he handed me a package. I unwrapped it, and it was a music box. I pressed the button, and it played As Time Goes By. Humphrey Bogart had given it to him when he was filming Casablanca. Hupfeld wrote the song in 1931. I asked him how much he got paid for it, and he said $25. Nothing else for it since then. I noticed the frayed cuffs. He wrote those lovely words and music, and $25 was all he ever got. Oh, I tell you, I thought of all the scripts written and words written, and how when people like a show they've seen, they give the actors all the credit. I have never heard anyone not in the business ever, say who wrote it. By the way, the music box was stolen from my apartment a few years later during a cocktail party by an announcer, Cy Harris. I saw him slip it into his pocket, but he was out the door before I could get over there. I never pursued it, was the point. Well, writing a half-hour script for live television was more involved, of course, than just doing a 10-minute sketch. You had the time factor to consider, for one thing. Well, it might make sense in the plot to go from that scene to that, but was it technically possible? People were always giving me ideas, funny things that happened to them. But then they say something like, and then, I couldn't believe it, 2 months later after we'd redecorated the living room, and I say I can't use it. I can't do 2 months later. It's not possible. There just isn't time. No, the scripts had to be, well, in real time, usually.
I had to write them so that they were mostly happen that day. It wasn't anything that happened the next day, because you've no idea how difficult it is with an audience, and you've got to take off your dress. It's got to be off by the time you hit the new garment going on, which means you've got to be zipped down the back by the cameraman as you go past there. And wait till you have to go to the bathroom, and you've got a 1/2 minute to do it in. Oh, I tell you.
Walter Hart was hired to direct my show. I didn't know him, but he'd had a play on Broadway when he was very young. He knew the Hollywood scene. He'd given Grace Kelly her first job in something. He directed TV. Walter was bright, and he was fun. And I could not have done the show without him. He instinctively knew what would work, logistically and for the camera, and what wouldn't. He knew how to shoot comedy. He knew how to keep expenses down, too. I mean, Ethel and Albert that first year, for example, cost me $18,000 every week, every show. By comparison, I Married Joan cost $30,000 per week. Same with My Little Margie. I Love Lucy came in at $40,000 per week. But they were all filmed, not live, and they were out on the coast. Well, we were offered the chance to go out there to do it on film, but I made the choice to stay, to keep it in New York, right or wrong. But I didn't want my daughter growing up in Hollywood. I just didn't. It was simple as that. Well, Walter Hart and I would go down to my apartment, and we'd go through my scripts. He insisted on having a tape recorder going as we talked, which I hated. I always felt very self-conscious.
All right, now we're about to begin the discussion on the script for November the 6th, is it? Thought it should start out with Ethel wanting the car in the morning. Well?
Running it?
Come on, just keep on going, will you? I mean, that is of no consequence. We can at least decide.
You expect me to go so fast, Walter, and I have
I don't expect you to go at all.
I don't have anything.
Don't have this discussion. Let's see what we can get out of this. All right, now go ahead. Now, what is it? What's on the paper?
The next is the lawyer's scene. They're withholding the car, huh? Well, the discussion of an accident. That's a bench shopping. Discussion of alligator bags.
Is that in the house, do you think? Maybe the lawyer's at her house?
Could be.
Saves money.
Saves money.
Mm-hmm.
You'd have to explain to me. I'm not sure. Picture of what happens.
Well, how you get a song published and what the usual method is and what you have to do to make a song popular, and they're good ones, too.
Okay. Now, wait a minute. Now, this ends. They're arguing
I didn't
over
mean
the money.
to get into it.
No,
I was
but
just
they're
trying to
arguing-
show you.
There's a slight argument over the money, we'll say.
You were the same way getting me to direct the show. I mean, the minute I said I wanted $10,000 a week, you said, okay. You were ready. That's a joke. Go on.
Sure is.
The very fact that she does look something like you, if she does, would even enhance the value of a scene like
Well, I maybe
this.
can shove my hair.
Well, you
higher.
certainly don't look like people who would come in there with a song that's going to, shake any worlds. You don't even look
All right,
like
go on, tell me your
the
scene.
writer of Ethel and Albert.
Did you read this last review said of me? It
Did
said
I read?
Did you read it? Said that I was an average-looking brunette.
Who said that?
This little girl that I met down at the head that interviewed me.
Where would she write about you? Where did she write
I
about you?
got it somewhere. I think I left it home. Said I was an average-looking brunette.
What'd she look like? Oh, that pretty one?
Uh-huh. She was
Well.
pretty.
I mean, you gotta be clean as a hound's tooth, or any of those, cliches. He says you gotta be above Caesar's wife, or something like that. You say, well,
Can I use the word Caesar's wife? I don't know what it means.
Caesar's wife must be above suspicion.
Oh, is that the expression?
Means that whoever is married to Caesar must be, really clean. And so they plant this, there is nothing in your
Sid
background,
Caesar
is
says
there, Al?
mother when that expression is brought up.
Huh?
Sid Caesar says mother. Later on when the expression
Yes,
is
that
brought up.
would
No,
be
dear,
cute.
it's Roman.
I think you should do that. Do that.
Yeah.
Just be cute.
Oh, God, I miss Walter. I miss his laugh. I miss his company. and the company he kept. He and his wife, Julie, lived out in Great Neck, Long Island, and they'd have parties. And I'm not a great party girl, but I just loved going. It's not particularly showbiz evenings, more, I suppose, intellectual. Always fascinating people there, bright people. Abba Eban, I met him there first, remarkable man. And Golda Meir, I think she was then the Israeli foreign minister. She was due on TV for an important panel discussion, needed to wash her hair before the show, but her hotel had run out of water. So I said, come on down to the apartment. I helped set her hair, and we ended up playing with the contents of the makeup case that my makeup girl, who was also Eva Gabor's makeup girl, had left behind. Golda Meir and I trying on Eva Gabor's false eyelashes and giggling, and deciding in the end that it didn't really suit either of us. She was fun. She stayed with me at the apartment whenever she was in New York. Well, I was only getting home to Stamford one day a week. Walter had 2 young boys, and Alan Bunce, who lived in Stamford not far from us, he had 3 kids, and we tried to work rehearsals around our respective children. We got home as much as we could. I think it's so essential to have your parents there, on your side, whatever you do. Well, I think it bothered me being away more than it bothered Lisa. Mama goes to New York to get the show ready. That's how she saw it. And she had her little playmates, Debbie Deutsch from down the lane, and Mother and Helen were so good to her, and the fun, they really were. And they watched her like a hawk, too. We'd had 2 or 3 kidnapping threats. I nearly lost my mind with worry. They never let her out of their sight for a second.
But when I'd leave and she'd cry, or well, I cried, I guess, didn't I? You didn't cry. Or maybe you did. I don't know. And I'd sort of be tearful all the way into town. I couldn't wait to get down to Gramercy Park and raced in, unlocked the door and called, oh, Mother. Yeah, where could I talk to her? Well, she's out and back now. She's playing with and I hear my mother. Lisa, your mother's on the phone. What? Your mother's on the phone. What does she want? Well, she'd like to talk to you, honey. Lisa, your mother's on the phone. To give a damn.
She was allowed to stay up and watch my show, but she'd be asleep by the time I got home. She'd wake up, though, for a goodnight kiss. I dabbed on a bit of Arpege perfume one night, thinking, oh, in later years she'll say, and I remember Mama smelling so sweetly when she'd lean down to kiss my head. And I wasn't even in the room before Lisa sat up and said, Pew, what's that stink? But we'd cuddle and talk, and she'd tell me what her favorite part of the show had been, usually the commercials, but which was a damn sight more than my mother ever did. Cripes. Somebody interviewing me once said, your mother must be so proud of you. What does she say to you when you come home to Stamford?
And I say, Mom just says, did you bring home your dirty clothes? And finally on the next day I'll say, well, did you see the show? Well, yes, of course. Well, what did you think? Well, you didn't have any eyes. What? What do you mean I didn't have any eyes? Well, it'd be the lighting, or you had 2 chins. I think Mother thought that I was going to get a big head if she said anything. My mother never gave me a compliment. I know that she was proud of me, but she never said a word. And then finally I said, you sure you saw it last night? What did you think? And so, well, it wasn't one of your best ones, but it was good. Couldn't say it was funny. I really liked it.
Well, after 67 episodes of hearing how my bust looked like 2 watermelons or that I looked bald, in fact, Mother did have a point there. This was black and white television, and dark hair tended to disappear against dark backgrounds. And Walter finally persuaded me to lighten it. I've been a redhead ever since. Everyone thought I copied Lucy. It was nothing to do with her. Anyhow, after 2 years with Sunbeam, we got picked up by another sponsor and another network.
And now, Instant Maxwell House Coffee presents Ethel and Albert. Written by Peg Lynch. Produced and directed by Walter Hart. And starring Peg Lynch and Alan Bunce.
Say, it looks like our stars have made an important discovery, because they're drinking Instant Maxwell House, the amazing coffee discovery. Yes, here is real coffee in a revolutionary new form. Now you can see for yourself It's not a powder, and it's not a grind either, but millions of tiny hollow flavor buds of real...
We were CBS's summer replacement for a very popular show of theirs called December Bride, starring Spring Byington. And when the reviews for Ethel and Albert came out, Maxwell House, General Foods, was livid.
Because we got good notices, and it said the replacement's better than the show, and we hope they'll keep it on. Well, General Foods were furious because they had just put $4 million into advertising for the show we were replacing. And so they wanted me to replace Alan. So I said, no, I'm not going to replace Alan. What are you talking about? And then they suggested that I get help as a writer. And then they wanted me to replace Walter. I said, no. And I was up against Henry Jaffe.
I mean, Christ, he was supposed to be on my side, you know? He was my lawyer. So I don't know what private deal he and General Foods had going. They had something cooking, that's for sure. But nobody was going to tell me how to run my show. I knew that much.
And I just said, no, I wouldn't do it. And then the show began being sabotaged. Well, it turned out later they paid off the cameraman, and he would throw his shots. People were paid to walk across through the show, and they were paid to come in, a crowd of people, in the control room to disconcert the TD and Walter.
Anything to make Ethel and Albert look bad, amateurish, unprofessional. We were in the middle of it one night, live on the air, a scene with 4 of us playing bridge, when suddenly the front door opens and some man walks straight past us all and into Ethel and Albert's dining room. Well, Alan threw me a panicked look, our eyes all widened, and I said quickly, as Ethel, oh, that's just the man coming to fix the faucet. Pay no attention. 3 hearts. And when I went on with my lines, but God, you know?
And one of the cameramen fell off the camera. He did something. They tripped over cables. It really was kind of lousy. I didn't know all this at the time. And about 4 years after that, I was riding home. Maybe it was 5. It was a long time. And a fellow got on the commuter train, and he spoke to me, and I nodded, and I knew him. And he said, you don't remember me? He said, I was the account executive on your show when you were doing it for Maxwell House. And I said, oh. Well, he said, it's because of you or your show that he said, I quit the business. He said, I couldn't take it when the word went out that my show was to be sabotaged totally. And they just couldn't bear the thought that we were doing very well. I was so childish on top of everything else. But he said, my wife said, just get out of the business. You're just dealing with a bunch of crooks. Just get out. And isn't that rotten? It really was.
Maxwell House insisted we film a closing tag after our final episode. Ethel and Albert just about to go out the door with their suitcases, leaving, in other words, when the doorbell rings.
Now, who do you suppose that is?
I don't know.
Look, never mind who it is. Don't get talking.
No.
We'll never make that train.
No. Just say we're in a hurry.
Well, look who's here.
Why, for heaven's sake, Spring Byington.
Well, hi.
Hello. Nice to see you. Did you have a pleasant summer vacation?
Wonderful, just wonderful. And you?
Now, look, you two girls, don't get talking. Now, we got to make a train.
Oh, I know, but I just had to drop in and say hello. Would you have time for an old trooper to step out of character for a moment?
Why, sure.
Well, I just wanted to tell you, not as a performer, but as a typical television viewer, how much I've enjoyed you this summer. Wonderful entertainment.
Oh, well, thanks.
And I know so many people who say Ethel and Albert are our favorite television friends.
Thank you, Spring. And Albert and I want to say goodbye to you and welcome back to Spring Byington.
Next week, over the same CBS station, Spring Byington and our wonderful television family will return for the fall in December Bride. We'll be watching. I know you will, too.
Spring must have made us do 50 takes, at least. It was deliberate. She knew I was just dropping. I'd been up since 4. Spring was fresh and bright-eyed and sparkling. I really wanted to batter one, you know. Helen Hayes once said to me, always be kind to actors, we're always out of work. I said, always be kind to writers, we're always working.
And I sort of took her words to heart. I was always nice to them, but I mean, Sometimes inside I get a little exasperated, but most of them on the show were decent. Alan was the worst acting actor I've ever had. And he just was so jealous. He didn't want anybody else to have a laugh. At it, just like an arrow in his heart every time somebody else got a laugh or had the scene.
And it really came to a head on one particular occasion.
Be sure to tune in every week for Ethel and Albert, brought to you by the Ralston Purina Company, St. Louis. Makers of Rice Chex, Wheat Chex, Instant Ralston, and Rye Crisp. Written by Peg Lynch, starring Peg Lynch and Alan Bunce. Produced and directed by Walter Hunt.
We'd moved over to ABC in '55 with a new sponsor, Cereal Stuff. I never tried it. We'd been doing it for about a year when we had a very famous actor on the show.
Our guest star, Basil Rathbone.
I'd gotten a call from my lawyer, a man named Jack London, a nice man, then at the Jaffe office, asking me if I could work another client, Basil Rathbone, into an episode. You know, Sherlock Holmes, the sheriff of Nottingham. Well, I couldn't even talk for a minute.
Rathbone on Ethel and Albert, what could he do? He did the castle steps with a sword and his little tights and all that. What the hell? Jackie said, well, he needs the money so badly. I said, well, I don't have money in my show to pay a celebrity like that. He said, listen, anything. We'll figure it out. Well, he came over anyhow, and I just didn't, I didn't know what to say to him at all. So then I said I had a bad tooth, and that's when he talked about his teeth. Then he said, oh, you having dental trouble? He says, I'm having a terrible time with the crown back here. We got on that, and then I said to him, I understand you have well, just like the script. You have a daughter, Cynthia, so I put all that in. And he was just darling. He really was. And I tried to figure out how ordinary people meet celebrities, and I figured that. I suppose that's the way my mind ran. I did want something like turn around and it's a surprise. I didn't want to just introduce him like that. I wanted it to be, and get him full face, you know. It was cute.
But will you stop staring, the two of you, for Pete's sake?
I am sure it's Basil Rathbone.
All right, so it's Basil Rathbone. Anyhow, I think it's Basil Rathbone.
I've always said Basil Rathbone, always. That's the English, and I think he's English. I just can't believe it. You know, I told you a few weeks ago on the plane coming back from Bermuda, we saw Trevor Howard, the British film star. I mean, and now to see Basil Rathbone.
What a wonderful year it's been.
What did you say, and what did he say? Well, I could get my mouth open. I said, are the crabs good? And he said, yes, very good, delicious. Really? Yes. Or maybe he said, yes, delicious, very good. I mean, I was so flustered, you know, I nearly died when he turned on.
I don't know why you're so excited about seeing a movie star, but Pete, I mean, they're no different than anybody else. Look, eat your shrimp, will you? Gotta meet Bradford at 9 o'clock.
No, I certainly want his autograph.
Oh, no. Well, let's not create a commotion, please. No.
I want people back home to believe I saw him.
Now, look, get the waiter to write Basil Rathbone on a piece of paper, and you take it home with you. Nobody will know the difference.
Really? Well, I know the difference. But I don't think we ought to bother him. I mean, anyhow, I wouldn't dare ask him. Why? I don't mind asking him. Oh, no, Aunt Eva.
No, Aunt Eva, stop her.
Aren't you Basil Rathbone?
Yes.
Well, I'm one of your most ardent fans. Always just loved you. In the movies, of course.
Oh, yes, of course.
Now, do you say Basil or Basil?
Basil.
He says Basil Rathbone. You were right, dear. Well, I'm Eva Ferguson.
How'd you
I
do?
want you to meet my nephew and his wife, Ethel and Albert Arbuckle. Come on, just come on.
I ended up writing not one, but 2 episodes around him. Alan was nearly out of his mind with jealousy.
Oh, God, what a time I had with him. Rathbone just drove him up the wall. And he disappeared into the toilet. And I said, where's Alan? And Rathbone said, I can't believe this. I said, well, what can you do? He said, I would think that any actor would give his eye teeth to have somebody writing a show just for him, week after week, something that he does well. Why is he disappearing with the temper tantrum into the toilet? I said, I don't know. You want to go get him? And Rathbone said, no, you go get him. I don't think he likes me. And I tramped into the men's room, and I said, now you got out of here. Now you come right back and do your part, for God's sake. I don't want to hear any more about it. And I dragged him out and continued, Alan glaring at Rathbone. Done a damn thing. And so then afterwards we were walking down the street, and I said, I don't know why you act this. I can't believe it. And in front of some company, for God's sakes. Well, he said, I know it's silly of me, I suppose, childish of me, but he said, after all, I am the star of the show. And I said, yes, of course, Christ. Oh, he said, you're good. You are good, and you're right. And I mean, God knows how you're right. I mean, that's just brilliant, throwing me a bone. But he said, I've been one with the experience. And, I've done plays, and I've done radio, and been on things, and I'm the star of the show. And I said, well, all right, fool. What an ass he really was.
Actors' insecurities, Well, I just ignored it, and we got on fine. And Rathbone stayed in touch. He'd call from Hollywood. I was riding on the bus today to the studio, he once said. The bus, can you imagine? And I thought of you, he said. It's that lift when I know I'm going to speak to you, like the lift you get when you find a 4-leaf clover. So sweet. I felt so sorry for him. His wife spent all his money, is what Jack London told me, on lavish parties. Oh, she'd do things like import snow to L.A., that sort of thing. Poor man. Well, he wasn't the only celebrity to appear on Ethel and Albert.
For many of you listening to the podcast right now, when you listen to that Basil Rathbone clip, the voice of Albert's Aunt Eva sounds mighty familiar. Because those of us who lived every year for the appearance on television of the most wonderful movie ever, the most terrifying movie also, because of one person, we recognized that voice right away.
I wanted another regular on the show, be useful, someone to play off. And Walter and I were going through the player's guide, trying to think who to cast. He suggested a name. I didn't know it. But then I recognized her photograph.
And I said, well, oh, yes. What are you talking? Why, we wouldn't think of calling her. And he said, why not? I said, well, she'd never do the show, for heaven's sake. She's been the Wicked Witch in this big movie. She's not going to be. He said, well, just remember, you can always invite somebody to a party. They don't have to come. They can always say no. And Maggie said yes.
Welcome, Margaret Hamilton, to Ethel and Albert.
Well, thank you. I'm very glad to be here.
Now prove you don't talk like that, Maggie. Yes. I prove I can talk this way, too.
Oh, all right, I have to ask. Did she get you and your little dog, too?
James, you'll just have to wait and find out.
We'll hear it all in the next episode of The Private Life of Peg Lynch. The Private Life of Peg Lynch was written by Astrid King and produced by Alex King.